On this week's episode, I am having Michael Liben, who's actually the host of his own podcast for bereaved parents. But this week, he's coming to speak on mine about his experience as a bereaved father. And so, Michael, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your daughter.
Well, I'm Michael. I host Bereaved But Still Me, which is a podcast for the bereaved community. My daughter Liel left us 10 and a half years ago. She was 15 and 8 months. She was born with a very interesting heart defect, and that did not take her. Her defect was corrected at around age 2. The correction required a pacemaker, so we basically traded up from what she had to heart block. At around age 4, she was diagnosed, but we had already known about autism. That didn't take her. And at about 13 and a half, she was living in the north of Israel, where we live. We live in Jerusalem. She was living about an hour and a half north of us. And she developed epilepsy. And everybody giggled because every second, they don't tell you, but every second kid who hits puberty with autism also generally develops epilepsy, but they didn't tell us that. And everyone said it's easy, it's all about balance and chemicals and medication and nothing to worry about. I was not calmed down by this. And as it turns out, one of the things they don't tell you, and I guess there's good reason to not to tell you because there's nothing you can do about it, is that in rare cases, up until about age 20 plus, there is a thing called sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, SUDEP. There's nothing you can do about it. It either happens or it doesn't happen. And I suppose that one of the reasons they don't tell anybody about it is because there's nothing you can do except lose sleep for 25 years. And so that's not very helpful, and it wouldn't make a difference. So whatever the reason, we didn't know. And apparently that's what started on a Friday morning. I had been working the overnight on Thursday, and I got a call at 6 o'clock in the morning from her home. And when I saw who it was on the phone, I knew this could not be good news for them to call me at 6 a.m. And they said, you got to come up here really quick because something's gone wrong. We don't know what, but she's had a seizure. She's not getting over it. She's on her way to the hospital. She has a low pulse and a low blood pressure. But it looked to me now in hindsight that SUDEP was beginning. And because they got her to the hospital with a pulse, and because they got her there with some blood pressure, they had to go through this, and it took 3 days for it to finish. And it was 3 agonizing days when we were there. We got there just about noon, and the doctor had waited for us, and he said, look, you've got 2 options. You've got bad, and you've got really bad. And really bad is that she might wake up, because the amount of brain damage that she's already suffered is untold. We just don't know. She will have no motion. She will be in bed. She will not smile. She'll be fed from a tube, and she'll basically just be there, but she won't be there. He put us very quickly into the picture. I think that was a good thing. Mm-hmm. And it took 3 days, and the family gathered from around Israel, and by December 31st, just hours before the new year, on what would have been 2013, she passed, and that was it. She passed easily. She passed slowly. Quickly, really. And we had talked about what we were going to do, and the doctor said, you have a couple of options here. You can turn off the machines and let her go. This is after they had decided that she had brain death, and from brain death there's no return, and you can't just turn off the machines unless there's brain death. So he said you could do that. You could turn off the machines but leave the breathing apparatus on so that she would crash on her own, and then you could tell your children you did everything possible, which is what we thought we would do. And I said, okay, let's do that, because at least, the kids won't say, why did you pull plugs, when maybe something would have happened. We would have seen her crash. And the doctor said, well, that's all well and good, but if you do that, there's nothing I can do for transplants. And suddenly I said, wait a minute, stop the presses. My wife and I had actually discussed this the day before, and we had decided that we really wanted to do transplants. Of course, to do that, you have to leave everything on, and you have to leave the body warm like an incubator, even though she would be pronounced dead, which is what happened. And then they had to decide who needed what, where would it go, and how could they do it. And as it turns out, we were at a small hospital in the north of Israel, a place called Nahariya, and they did not have a heart-lung machine. Now, there was a question if anybody wanted her lungs anyway, because when she was very, very young, she had had surgery near the lungs, and so they were less than perfect. But in the middle of the night, they found somebody that could use the lungs. They found a 66-year-old woman of short stature who could take them. And that meant they had to ambulance her to Tel Aviv, because where they were, they didn't have a heart-lung machine. So we got sent home in a taxi. She got packed up into an ambulance and driven to Tel Aviv. And between that night and the next morning, they farmed all the parts they could. And that one woman who was 66 years old got 2 lungs. A woman who was 54, if I'm not mistaken, got the liver. And I think the pancreas. A kidney went to a woman who was 45, and a kidney went to a young girl, 7.5. On top of that, 1 cornea, some cartilage, and a skin sample all went to the bank. So we just assume that's been distributed. We don't know how or when. And so that night, 4 families were rejoicing, and we were not. And that is the long and the short of. It's a very short version of the story, really. But that's Liel, and she was a great kid. She loved everything. She loved to learn. She loved to learn about languages. She loved math. She was easily bribed. If you would do this sheet of math work, we'll teach you a word in the language of your choice. And so she was learning words. Of course, she spoke Hebrew. She was learning words in English. She was learning words in Arabic. She was learning words in French, Spanish. If there was anybody around her who knew another language, it just got tossed in. And that was the kind of thing she was. She very mischievous, as all kids with autism tend to be. We laugh now, but she did some experiments that were less than safe. She wanted to know what would happen if she put a bunch of her medications and a stapler in the microwave. We found out. She wanted to know what would happen if you put a plastic blow-up beach ball on top of the stove, which, by the way, is an open flame, not just heat, but an open flame. We found out what that does. We did not know this, my wife and I, but one day she was home alone with the other kids. They were watching her, but not really doing a great job of it. She wanted to know what would happen if she went into the bathroom and closed the door and took the spout, right? It's long. Mm-hmm. And goes into the sink, right? So she took the spout off. What would happen? And she had a nice fountain going, and the place filled with water. And she wanted to go swimming, is what happened. And it was like I Love Lucy, apparently. I don't know, because I wasn't there, but the kids tell me they opened the door and like this wall of water comes out. But they got it all cleaned up and dried before we came home, so we didn't know a thing about it for, I think, a couple of years. So wow. There's that. Autism is a funny thing. If you can say, I found the keys in the chicken, and mean it, because you're looking for the house keys, the car keys, and you found them inside the chicken that somebody was about to make for dinner. Yeah, that's about normal. Everybody at home has a drawer where you look for stuff. Your first go-to drawer. It's usually in the kitchen, and it's got string and scissors and a screwdriver and whatever you're looking for. If you have that, but you also regularly check the washer, the dryer, and the oven for things that have gone missing, you're living with autism. So she was a handful, and we loved her dearly, and we miss her more so. And that's her. That's my daughter, Liel. Liel's a great name, by the way. It means God is with me, and he must have been, because he protected her from all those dangerous wild things that she did. And he kept her with us for as long as we could have her. So that was it.
How many other children do you have, and what are their ages in relation to Liel?
So Above her is Sapir, who is less than a year and a half older than her. And above Sapir is my son Idan, who is about a year and a half older than Sapir. So they're all very close within a 3-year stretch. So there was always one point in the year, I think from about April, where there was always like 5, 6, and 7. They're always 1 year apart. It made us look busier than we actually were, because really the stretch was about a year and a half on everybody, almost a year and a half on everybody. But it was a wild time, let me tell you. The other kids, we had to grow them up really fast, and for that I am eternally sorry and I apologize. We had to shave off a piece of their childhood so they could help. But they were great, and now they're all marvelous adults. Idan is just about to turn 29. Sapir is 27, and Liel today would be 26. And Idan's wife, my lovely daughter-in-law, is a year younger than Liel, so think of that. All right, she's old enough to get married, and she's younger than Liel, so there you go. There you go. It's wild and wacky. I don't recommend it to anybody, but if you do have if you are living with autism, it's wild, it's wacky. Buckle down, because you never know where it's going to go. And no two kids are the same, so there's no playbook, nothing, nada. That's her.
When you look back now and think about like everything that Liel made it through, from birth through diagnosis of autism, and then all the other stuff that she overcame to end up passing away young from something else, kind of unrelated but definitely unexpected. Yeah. How do you process that? Like, I guess reconciling everything you guys went through for it to all end up ending that way in the end anyway.
Everybody will process it differently. My wife says that she was lent to us for whatever reason for as long as we needed her, and then somebody else needed her. That is one option. It's not my favorite. I'm just more fatalistic about it. We had her, and then we don't, and we did the best we could, and in some sense we were all tested, and we all found out what we're capable of doing, because you don't know until you're there. Ask anybody who's dealing with autism. It's a rough ride. It's a rough ride. Sometimes you feel like you're being punished, sometimes you feel like you're being tested, and sometimes you feel like you're being gifted. It's just... what can I tell you? I mean, I don't want to say anything bad about it, but it's a rough ride. I have friends who are in it, and I feel for them. But we had, let me put it this way. When she was born in 97, and in those days in the internet, they had a thing called listservs. You may not be old enough to remember them. A listserv was an email group. There was no chatting then. There was nothing live. It was a group that you would sign up to be on this list, and whoever wrote into it sent an email to that list. That email would go to everybody on the list. And there were about 800 families around the world with parents with children with heart disease. And sometimes we'd argue, and sometimes we'd fight, and sometimes we'd share information. A lot of times we'd just hug each other. Somebody asked the question, if you could wave a magic wand and fix your child's heart, would you do it? This was just heart. This had nothing to do with autism or anything else. Would you do it? Surprisingly, a lot of the parents and a lot of the children who had grown to become adults with heart disease said no. They would not do it, because that would not be the child that they raised. I have mixed feelings about it. At the time, I was very strong with that. I'm not sure that if I could wave a wand and remove autism, I'm not sure I wouldn't do it. But I'm also aware that we would be trading for different problems, right? Because all kids are problematic at one time or another, right? Teenagers, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I would rather have the teenage problems that I didn't have because I was dealing with autism. I might have dodged a few bullets there. I'm just really not sure. she's the child we had, and she's the child we raised, and I don't think I would want to change that, really. And who knows, you take advantage of that wand, you don't know what you're going to get, right? Right? We didn't have any drug addiction issues. We didn't have any other teenage issues. There were no boy issues. Man, we might have been lucky. Fate is kind of funny that way, and I wouldn't want to risk it. I loved her the way she was, and I still do, and that's my girl. That's my little one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point, that it can be very easy to let yourself get sucked into this idea that if only this element or instance was removed, then everything would have just been perfect or idyllic, and forgetting that that's just not how life works. Like, there's other things then that come into play, and you can't predict things like that. And it's much healthier, I think, to keep that frame of reference rather than convincing yourself that if only, then you would have had this utopian experience, because that's just a path to self-destruction.
Well, absolutely, because if only, but you can't do it. So you hold it out in front of you like something you want, but you can't have that. Why not put all of your energy into what you do have and make it the best it can be, right? And so that's what we do. I mean, a friend of mine at the time, he said I was a hero, and I thought he was talking about transplants. Apparently he was talking about the whole thing in her life. I don't see it that way, and I don't think any other parent of a special needs child sees themselves as particularly heroic. We got what we got, and we did what we had to do, and that is it. Now, at some point, you can get philosophical and say, well, I never thought I could do this. I never thought I'd be strong enough to do that. Look at what we've done. If you look back on it, and you've been successful, you say, look at all the great things we did. Maybe. But at the moment you're in it, you're just in it. And you've got to make the best you can do with it, and that's what you got. And I don't think it's productive to think about what if. Maybe we could do it differently. You couldn't do it differently. That's what you got. And I think acceptance is going to be a lot better for you and for your child as a way to go. And the fact is, at the end, the doctor, when he said we had two choices, right? Bad and really bad was that she might wake up. I know what he was saying. And I jumped over all those stages of grief, and I went directly into acceptance, and I watched my family go nuts, right? You do what you're supposed to do, and that's fine, right? You do what's comfortable for you, and that's fine. You do what you want to do, and that's fine. So my family chose a more orthodox Jewish approach, and they read Psalms, and they prayed over her, and my son went off looking for rabbinic advice, and all that's fine, okay? But my son came to me at one point. He said, we're going to get her back. We're going to make her better than she was. You'll see. We're going to do this. And I said, yeah, but what if you don't do that? What if it doesn't work that way? And he said, you have no faith. And I said, whoa, stop. I have a lot of faith. I've got buckets of faith, but my faith is not going to be like your faith at this moment, okay? You're looking for magic, and you're setting yourself up for, but I asked for it, or but I prayed for it. I read the Psalms I'm supposed to read, right? And what if you don't get it, right? So sometimes faith is the belief that things tend to work out the way they should, whether you like it or not. And so you need to talk about acceptance. Faith sometimes shows up in the acceptance. Sometimes it's transactional, right? What my brother on our program once called foxhole faith, right? You're in a dangerous situation and you say, God, just get me out of this, and I promise I'll be good, and I'll do this, that, and the other thing. And that's very transactional, and sometimes that's correct. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it's faith that gets you out of the moment, and you need that. But there are different kinds of faith, and sometimes the faith is that you need to accept the way things are, whether you like it or not. And that's very calming in the end, right? Because, well, if that's how it should be, I might not like it, but it is what it is. Now, I'm not saying accept everything bad. I'm not saying don't fight, I'm not saying don't ask. Ask, fight, but be prepared that sometimes the answer is no. Not always. That's why we ask. But prayer is not magic. Faith is not magic. Sometimes you get it. Sometimes you don't. But when you pass the point where you've asked for it and you can't have it, accept it. And there's a fine line there, because I don't want to abrogate free will. You can ask. You don't have to sit there blindly and say, well, okay, this is what's happening, this is good. No, not necessarily. Sometimes for God to come through for you, you have to do something. Anything, but something. In Hebrew we call that hishtadlut. You have to do what you can do. And then, yes or no. But prayer is a conversation. It's not magic, right?
Yeah.
I prayed. Yeah, okay, but sometimes that's not what you need. So you have to do what you have to do, and you have to do what you can do. And then after that, you're on your own. So,
did you arrive at that point of understanding the necessity of that acceptance at some point during Liel's life with all of her medical things that you guys overcame, or did that moment really happen when you were in the midst of her dying?
I think I maybe didn't put words to it, but I think I had been there for a long time, because it was just too easy to go into acceptance on that morning. Okay, I mean, you got the worst news you could possibly get, and we had been, remember, in and out. She had 4 catheterizations and 3 heart surgeries. She had her second pacemaker implanted a couple of years before. We're no stranger to life and death situations with Liel, right? So I think somewhere along the line, I reached that point. But up until now, it was fairly easy because everything was a success, right? 3 successful heart surgeries, 4 caths, 3 of which were successful, 1 maybe less so, but it didn't hurt her. Okay? 2 pacemakers, very successful. We were more concerned during her lifetime, I think, with autism than we were with her heart disease, because her heart was fine. Fine in the sense that there was medical support to keep it going, and you could lean on that. That's how good it was. You could lean on it. So I think somewhere along the line we came to accept, or I came to a point of acceptance, because first of all, it'd been going real well. It hadn't let me down yet. And second, we were there. There's not a whole lot you can do. And we've seen a lot in our lifetime, so okay, yeah. I think sometimes you realize it's over,
Yeah. And what kind of role did your faith play in your life, throughout your adulthood before Liel passed?
Well, Judaism is very, in its outlook, it's very matter of fact. It's about how to live and react in your time, right where you are. It's less future oriented. It's very rear window looking. It's very past oriented, but with an eye to the future. Okay, we learn from the past in order to live well in the present. So it's more about that. We lived a reasonably orthodox life. We still do. But I think that's where my ideas of faith were born. I think that's where it was carried. I was taught to look at prayer as a conversation. I remember my kids in school in Israel, in the first grade, a child receives his first Bible and his first prayer book. And we had a very enlightened principal of the elementary school. And she said, you have to look at it as a conversation. He said, in the Bible, God is talking to us. But in the prayer book, we're talking to God. And so that's a cyclical motion. So that puts you on a plane where you can speak easily. Our sages have taught us over the centuries that man is a partner in creation. The junior partner, but a partner. So we have, as people, as humans, we have a relationship with God that we can, I don't want to say it's conversational, but it is kind of conversational. We can relate to God. We can talk directly to God. We can ask. We can pray. Prayer is not exclusive to any religion. But I think somewhere in there we understood that faith comes in different flavors. And faith is a question of where you are at the moment. And It isn't magic. I think that the real big takeaway is that none of this is magic. The relationship between humans and God is one of, well, it's day-to-day work, right? We are charged to do what we do, and we have a standing relationship, and our place is known, but we can't really change a lot. We have, as people, we've changed and transformed the entire planet, but we're also charged with taking care of that planet. And so our relationship is very here and now and very practical. I think that's what I'm looking for, very practical. And in that, you learn that sometimes there are things you can't do. You have to accept things that you can't have. And so I think I had arrived at that point much, much earlier, but it didn't really come to be a major force until I was face to face with death in a way that I couldn't deal. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the best answer. It's a difficult question, and I appreciate it, but it's very hard for me to kind of bring around a better answer than that.
No, I mean, it's a complicated question, but it's also something I think that is important for people to talk about, to the best of their ability. Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about describing what the rituals are in your faith following the death of somebody? Sure. And how that supported you in your grief process?
But Shiva is from the number 7, and it's also from the word leshevet, which means to sit. And so we sit for 7 days at home, and we do nothing. We are taken care of by our friends and family and by our neighbors. We sit generally in low chairs or on the floor, which is a biblical sign of mourning. Men don't shave for a week. In Israel, they cut our shirt so that the shirt is torn, right? In America, that's just not on, so they have a little button with a little piece of material, and it's cut, and they wear the button. But the idea is that you have outward signs. You show people who may not know you that you're in mourning. And then for 7 days, you sit home, and you mourn. And what does that mean? So people come to comfort you, and you spend 7 days basically talking about the person you've lost. Because somebody comes for an hour or 2 hours and they go, and then somebody else comes and you start all over again. They'll say, tell me about your daughter. I say, well, okay. And you tell a lot of stories. And at the beginning, all the stories are bitter because you've just lost her and it's killing you, it's eating you up on the inside. And everything that makes you think of her is just terrible. It's ripping you apart. But over time, you tell the stories, and you tell the stories, and you refine the stories, and they become bittersweet because, well, quite frankly, you tell the good stuff, right? You tell people about the time she experimented with the microwave. You tell people about the time she wanted to know about the beach ball and the fire. And since nobody got hurt, it's a funny story now. And by the 3rd or 4th day, cabin fever starts to set in, and everyone's getting a little funny and a little giddy. And the stories get a little more humorous. And by the end, you've gone from bitter to bittersweet to sweet, because every memory now reminds you of someone you love. And it's very sweet, and you've told the story so many times now, and everybody loves them, and they're happy stories because you don't tell anything negative, right? You wouldn't do that. We had a guest once, a pastor, Danny Mack, and he said that grief and love are two sides of the same coin, and that grief is a loving experience, right? If you take I grieve for you and change it for I love you, you're saying the same thing. Only you can't say it when the person's not there. How do you talk about them? And so that's what happens. By the end of the 7 days, you have come around. So what Shiva basically does is it lets you go down as low as you want to go in your sorrow. But you're never just dropped off at the bottom. You're always surrounded by friends and by family. And when it's time to start coming back upwards, Shiva will do that. It will lift you up. And then on the 7th day, on the morning of the last day, before ending the process of Shiva, you get up and you literally take a walk around the block to show your neighbors we're back in the world, we're back in society, we're here, we've come home. Now, it's important that you understand Shiva is only the beginning of a process. Nobody says, you've sat 7 days, get over it. Right? That's the beginning of a process. During the regular prayers, which Orthodox Jews pray 3 times a day, there is a prayer called the Kaddish, which is for mourners to say. And you'll say that for the rest of the month. If it's for a parent, you'll say it for 11 months. So the mourning continues, but it continues at various levels. So even if it goes on for a year, okay, no one says get over it. No one says you have to be over it. You can mourn for somebody for 100 years. But the process takes you through a system where you experience your grief within yourself and you look at it face to face, come to terms with it, and you come back up. Now, again, grieve as long as you want. There's nobody in Judaism says you've done that, now you're done. But that process helps get you going in a way where you can. And what you end up doing is you take your grief and you package it up very nicely, and you attach it to yourself, and you take your loved one with you wherever you go, and he or she is always there, but in a way that you can relate to the rest of the world. And what you've done basically now is you've created memories. You can tell her story to everybody else who didn't know her. She essentially continues to live on because she lives on with you and through you and sees the rest of the world through your eyes. And you can do that. Come to this symbiotic relationship where there's another soul with me that I take wherever I go. And that's very comforting, at least for me. Again, we're not judging, right? It's comforting for me to know that she's always with me. When I'm driving, my father is always right here telling me bad jokes. Because that's what he did. Right? I hear him all the time. And the worst dad jokes, by the way, and the worst puns, just terrible. Awful. But that's what I love. So that's what I keep with me. And it's the same thing with everybody else. Same thing with my daughter. Eventually there will be others, but in the meantime, I'm juggling 2 of them with me, and that's what I've got. Yeah.
So does that mean that when you're going through Shiva and even following that, is there room in Judaism for you to have those spiritual experiences too? Or is that like not talked about or even frowned upon maybe?
It's not frowned upon. If you have them, you have them. If you don't, you don't. After we talked the first time, I didn't realize this, but my wife is convinced that there's a finch, a little tiny bird that sits out on our kitchen window, and she says, that's Liel, she's come to visit. Or alternately, Liel has sent that bird to say hello. Either way. In keeping with your example, I about a week and a half ago, in contemplation that I was coming on this podcast, there were 2 hummingbirds that sat outside my window, which they don't normally do. They sat there for a couple of minutes and looked at each other and then flew away. You're entitled to put into that whatever you like. There's nothing that says it is, there's nothing that says it isn't. And so you have that creativity, that moment where you can create it. And I'll give you an example that spooked me, but in a good way. Spooked me in a good way. When Liel had died, I was working in a hotel, and part of my job was to patrol that hotel, and I would go into all these dark corners and alleyways where guests don't go, and occasionally I would feel her presence. Now, I know I was feeling her presence because as she was autistic, she used to bite her hand a lot, so she had this huge callus on her hand. So as I'm walking, I would put my hand out a little bit, and I could feel that callus grabbing my hand. I knew she was there. I absolutely felt it. Okay. And so I would walk around the hotel, sometimes in the evening, and sometimes very late at night, and I felt that she was with me. Now, that's not a majorly Jewish concept. I'm not saying that it isn't, but it's not really where we spend our time. That's not where the Jewish head is at. And yet there she was, right? Mm-hmm. So one night I looked over at the emptiness next to me that was holding my hand, and I said to her, listen, I don't know if I'm going crazy. I don't know if you're really here. I don't know. But if you are here, I'm your father. I'm going to ask you to do one thing for me. Come to your mother's dream tonight, because if she sees you, then I'll know I'm not crazy. Right? Because then it will have crossed over to another person. It's not like I wanted to dream about her, because I want to dream about her. And so I went home, and that night at about 2:30 in the morning, my wife wakes up going, I said, what's the matter? What's the matter? What happened? What happened? She said, I just had my first dream about Liel. I saw her. Now, to be fair, in the world of science, I could not repeat that experiment as hard as I tried. But that was enough. That was enough. So I felt that her presence was with me. I felt that we were communicating in one form or another. And she did what I asked her to do, like a good little daughter. So that was great, So I have had dreams where I've seen her. I have had dreams where I've seen other people who have died. And they're very, very real. But I can, unlike that night, I can come up with a reason for it. In other words, I can explain the way. A very close friend of mine died, and I didn't know for a year and a half. And when I found out, I had a dream that we were back in summer camp together, and I went into the place where we worked on the stage, and he was there, and I said, they told me you were gone. He said, well, here I am. And we hugged each other and said goodbye, and that was the end of the dream. Now, it felt very, very real, and I would never take that away from anybody who wanted to say, you really saw him. And perhaps I did. But why would he wait a year and a half, right? So maybe, just maybe, I found out about him, really wanted to say goodbye, and my brain obliged me and manufactured that dream. Maybe. I don't know. I really don't know. But I can explain it away, right? I can use science on that one and say, well, the mind is a powerful toy, and if you really wanted to see him, you were going to see him, and that is that. But that dream with her appearing in my wife's dream, I can't explain that. And I'm happy with that I can't explain it. I'm absolutely okay with it. Judaism doesn't deny there's another world. It just doesn't spend a lot of time on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Our focus is on the here and the now. Do the right thing because it is good to do so, right? It's a Hebrew expression, a good deed is its own reward. Okay, schar mitzvah, mitzvah means the reward for doing a good deed is the deed itself. And I accept that, and that's the main focus of Judaism. It's not about the future. It's not generally aimed at the next life. It's not a test. You're here, do well now.
Yeah. I just find it fascinating that, I guess I wonder, what do you think drives you to have this need to try and figure out how to explain it with science?
Well, I was born in the United States in 1959, and that was the way things were. Carl Sagan, of blessed memory, has said the same thing. He said, who doesn't want to hear their parents' voice, right? I've had those illusions, but I know they're illusions. I know they're not real, he says. There's that part of me that wants to understand. There's that part of me that wants to explain. There's that part of me, I like science. I like the idea that, if you take two objects of different weights and drop them from the same height, they will hit the ground at the same time. There's a certain comfort in the finality and the correctness of scientific rules, okay? Sometimes we understand the rules wrong and we have to correct. That doesn't mean we were wrong. It just meant that we didn't fully understand something. Science is like that. Science is full of correcting, full of understanding, re-understanding, and fixing what you got wrong. That's the way it works. So in a sense, it's very, very comforting to me to know that I can explain things. That's just me. I'm doing physiotherapy right now, having come back from some difficult prostate surgery. And I asked the therapist, this exercise, I do it here, it controls there. What's that? She said, stop asking questions. Just do the exercise. You don't have to know how it works or why it works. It works. And that's just who I am. I need to know why. I need to know how. Maybe I'm a control freak. I don't think there's anything to do with being Jewish. It's just who I am.
Yeah. It takes all kinds. So that's just why I'm curious. And
right.
I guess my follow-up question to that is, does Judaism give you that same kind of comfort because it comes from tens of thousands of centuries of tradition and structure and things that you can follow specifically?
Maybe so. Maybe there's a certain orderliness to Judaism that I appreciate, right? If this, then that. But I don't want to think of myself as a prisoner of a religious belief. I like this. It makes sense to me. It guides my life in certain aspects. I don't think I need religion to be moral. I think morality is of its own sense. I appreciate that religion attempts to have or attempts to show or provide a framework of morality. We can argue if the morality from 4,000 years ago is the morality we want today. We can talk about that. There's room there. But what I like about Jewish life is that its structure is clear, but I don't feel that it's grinding down on me. Some people might think it does. We have a thing that we call it all mitzvot. It's an all is like what it says in English. All is like what you put around an ox, right? Mm-hmm. And the weight of the commandments is a weight, and we understand that, respect that. We take it on, right? Or we don't, but we take it on. It's a weight. On the other hand, Jewish life is very structured and very comfortable and very nice, right? I like that on Friday afternoon everything shuts down for 24 or 25 hours until Saturday night. From sundown to sundown, Shabbat is really a very Sabbath kind of moment, and I like that. It's a big refresher and a charger of batteries. I'll say it differently. You don't have to believe in God to lead a good Jewish life. I think you would. I think it would bring you to that. But there are plenty of people who lead a good Jewish life who are more than questioning on what God does for them. But the system works. The system works really well. And it's also designed, it's a very communal experience. Judaism is a very community-oriented experience. So that when you have a trauma like this, like a loss, when you are sitting Shiva, you know your neighbors are going to walk in with meals and food and say, "Where's the kitchen? Get out of here. We got this." And I've done it for other people. Our synagogue is very organized that way, and there's an unfortunate death in the community. The email goes out, who's bringing what, who's got what day, who's cooking, who's bringing. And the family that's mourning can really rely on that. It's a great thing. I mean, you want to be 100% in your mourning, right, in your grief. Not so you can get over it faster, but you want to be in it. You want to start processing it. It's everything there is. My father died just before final exams, and I was a teacher. And we had to move my exams off, and I was going to miss a week with my kids at school, getting them prepared. And I'm beginning to go, what do we do? Oh my gosh, like this, that. The principal called me up. She said, "You just do what you have to do. We'll move the date for the exam. You'll get the extra time. Everything will work itself out. You stay home and do what you have to do." That's a great thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can rely on that. My employer told me, "Get out of here, stay away, take care of you first." Have you ever seen that anywhere else? Right?
Not commonly.
Most employers say, "Get over it. We need you. It's been a couple of days already. How, Mm-hmm. That's what we call the podcast Bereaved But Still Me, right? I've changed a little bit. I'm bereaved. I'm not exactly who I was before, but I'm still me. I'm still who I was in some sense, and I've changed a little. I've adapted, but it's still essentially me. I'll be back. But we need that space. We need that time. We need that moment to process and to grieve properly, to really be absorbed within ourselves.
Yeah. My final question that I have, because you're further along your grief journey than I am, and I know you mentioned that your oldest recently got married, and I'm curious how, if there even is anything specific that you do with handling when you come upon those milestones and knowing that you're going to continue to have more, and that Liel's, not physically present for. Are there things you do to keep including her, or how does that feel?
I'll tell you something. I actually learned there some important things at that exact moment. When Liel died, we were all concerned with ourselves, right? I have a wife, I have 2 other children, and we're going, how do we continue? How do we move on from this? And then my niece wrote something on the internet, and I realized oh dear, she had cousins, didn't she? And the ripples go out, and other people were affected. People her own age were processing, how do you lose somebody your own age? Someone you knew, someone you grew up with, someone you played with. And I said, wow, this ripples out further than I thought. A few years ago, we were celebrating my in-laws, I think 50th or 60th, maybe 60th wedding anniversary. And my brother-in-law, their son, my wife's brother, was kind of a master of ceremonies. And while he was introducing the evening and the event and what was going to happen, he mentioned Liel. I'm going to cry. He cried. I cried. We all cried. It wouldn't have occurred to me to bring that up at my in-laws' wedding anniversary. And yet there he was saying, we're a family, we're a big family, we don't forget anybody. And I suddenly realized she had uncles. Who knew, right? She had cousins, she had uncles, she had grandparents. And they were all, in one way or another, touched by this. And so yes, every time there's a family event, it comes up. And we remember her as we remember anybody else who's gone, and we mention them. And in so doing, we bring them along with us into these events, and we share these events. It hadn't occurred to me her uncles might care. It hadn't occurred to me her cousins might have noticed, right? Because we're all locked up in ourselves. Families are big, and the ripples go out forever. And that's a good thing. It's very comforting to know that wherever we are, whatever we do, somebody's going to bring her into that event. I mean, I would bring her in personally with me, but to have her put up front, that was great. It was special. It was amazing. I learned a lot from my nieces and nephews, and I learned a lot from my brother-in-law. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Well, before I let you go, are there any other parting words that you have for a grieving parent who's listening to this episode?
Yeah, I do. First of all, everybody's grief is different, okay? You don't have to be like me. You don't have to be like your neighbor. You don't have to be like anybody in your family. And don't listen to anybody who says, get over it already. Did you run into that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, you did. If you think that your child is visiting you either through the natural world, through butterflies or through hummingbirds or finches or anything that flies, that's fine. If you don't say, gee, what's wrong with me? I didn't feel that. You didn't feel it. That's all. That's fine. Right? Not everybody's going to say, wow, I saw a butterfly, or I saw a bird, or I saw my daughter, or I dreamed about her. You may not. Everybody is an individual, and there is no wrong way to process grief. That's the most important thing. Okay? Don't beat yourself up. And the other thing is, you didn't do it. All right? You're not the bad guy. All right? Don't say, if only I had done this or done that, if I had looked left instead of looking right, or whatever. You didn't do it. Okay? You are not responsible for the death of your child. Your child, for whatever reason, is not with you. You have to deal with that, and don't say, wow, I could have done it differently, because you can't change it. It's done, and you didn't do it. Right? You didn't hurt that kid. I guarantee it. Who would, right? It's really hard not to beat yourself up over the death of a child. What did I do wrong? What did I do? What I could have done something differently. You can't change. You can't change. You didn't do anything wrong. You're a good parent. You were always a good parent. And sometimes things happen. Sometimes they just happen. And if I thought beating yourself up or beating myself up was going to bring to something good, okay, good. But it won't. It won't. It won't help you. It won't help the rest of your family. It won't help your spouse. It won't help your children. It won't help the nieces and nephews, and it won't help the brothers-in-law, all of whom care. All of whom care. All of whom want to help you. There's just no one way to do it, okay? I love the way I do it because I was taught to do it that way. I've experienced it twice now, and I find tremendous comfort in the way I do it. You don't have to do it like that. You're welcome to try. I'll help you. I'll talk to you. I'll advise you. But you don't have to. You don't have to. If writing is good for you, then write. If composing songs is good for you, do that. If just sitting around screaming at the world is good for you, do that. If that's good for you, go ahead and do it. If swearing at the world is good for you, close the door, but go ahead and do it. There is no one right way to mourn for everybody. Okay? I have my own traditions. I love them. I do what I do. I watched my parents go through it, and so I was ready when it was time to go through it for my father. I wish I didn't have to do it for my daughter, but there it was, and I knew what to do, and I was great with it. If it's not for you, don't do it. Find a way that lets you express yourself and process your grief any way you want, and don't listen to anyone who tells you how to do it. It's the absolute worst thing they can do, right? I know we got to close, but I just want to one last thing. In the book of Job, right? Basically, Job sat Shiva for 7 days. He sat in silence. His friends came, and unless they were spoken to, they said nothing. And that was great. That was really great. Don't say anything, because you'll just say the wrong thing. When the Shiva was over, these guys opened up their mouths and just said, well, maybe you did something wrong. Maybe the problem's with you. Maybe you're not. Shut up. Don't do that. Don't do it. One of the things that people feel they have to do is say something pithy. No, you don't. Right? If you want to say something to a person who's mourning, say, tell me about your loved one. That's great, because then you shift the conversation to them. They'll tell you anything they want to tell you. They won't tell you what they don't want to tell you. They won't go where they don't want to go. And you won't ask any stupid questions or say something dumb. Mm-hmm. Just let them talk. You be quiet. You listen. And don't tell anybody how to mourn. It's the worst thing you can do. Right? Be quiet. That's not comforting. It's not helpful.
No.
And you have to decide. There are two kinds of people. The evil and the good. And the evil are clearly obvious. You know, did you do stuff? They blame you, right? Those people, you can get them out of your life. But there are people who are really nice. They say dumb things, but they really mean it. And you have to be very careful with those people. Love that person. Because that person went and looked deep to find the worst hurt that they ever knew to try to find a way to relate to you. And thank God for them, all they had was tonsillitis. Right? They're okay. Love those people because they really tried. Right? Get rid of the ones who blame you, and keep the ones who try to empathize, who try to find a way to get to you because they really want to get to you. And they love you. So those are the two things. Don't listen to anybody who tells you how to mourn, and keep the right friends, and get rid of the ones you don't need because they're not your friends.
Yeah. That's great advice.
I giggle, but
yeah.
I giggle, but it's true. It's true.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for coming on and sharing your story and Liel's story. And I believe that she helped bring all this together and orchestrate. And so I'm grateful to her for the role that she played. And I am grateful for you and the work that you do on your podcast at Bereaved But Still Me. And
we've been on the air now. We're finishing our 7th year. So we got a backlog of some good programs. You'll find something that speaks to you, whether it's about losing a child or a friend or someone you've worked with, just questions of faith, comparative religion, no religion, anything. If there's something that you need, you'll find it there. You'll find it there. And all we want to do is give you something to listen to. Well, we're not doctors. We don't play them on TV. We only want to give you a little bit of strength, something to think about, a little empowerment. That's all we need.
yeah, and I'll make sure and link it in the show notes below as well.
Please do. I appreciate that very, very much.
Thank you so much, Michael.
I have to say, though, that Bereaved But Still Me is a group effort. There are lots and lots of people who write these things, who work on them, who produce them, who edit them, and we really, all of us have something, and all of us want to give, and that's why we're there.